Hi there, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Love, Desire, Serial Color, comma, and Tension. I thought I'd throw that in. Okay. This is the last session of today's day. I would like to start. Oh, please let me know if you can't hear. It does get quieter once the room gets closed, but if you move slightly closer, it'll be easier. Also, James has offered to sing today's session if there's any issues with not being able to hear anything. I would like to start with a land acknowledgement, if I may. So, we'd like Editors Canada would respectfully acknowledges that we are and work on the traditional lands of the Indigenous peoples, the Inuit, First Nations, and Métis, in which we now call Canada. We honour the ancestry, heritage, and gifts of the Indigenous peoples and give thanks to them. Today's session is being presented by James Harbeck. It seems kind of odd to be introducing him since I've known him as an editor for ever and ever. Okay, 20 years. 20 years, a bit longer. A very long time, that's right. So his bio is on the session site, as you probably saw. He's developmental editor, everything editor of nonfiction, primarily, for a very, very long time. He will be entertaining us for the next hour. Questions will be at the end, if possible. Thank you. James, over to you.
Yes, I will be entertaining, and then I will be entertaining questions. That's how it goes. I will be questionably entertaining. No, I have to turn on my timer. Okay. I don't really need to do the intro because I have been introduced. So, what this session is about, this session is geared more to people who haven't done a whole lot of structural editing. If you have, you may find some of this old news. Some of this. I actually really like when I get a chance to see other people's approaches to structural and substantive editing because it's always different. People do different things differently. And usually I learn some really good things to do, and occasionally I learn some really things I'm not going to do. Okay, nonfiction. If we know one thing about nonfiction, it's that it's not just about facts. People read nonfiction because they desire to know something, to get from where they are to where they want to be. It's an adventure, and the reader is the hero, and we're here to get them there. As I told one author, and I hope you don't mind my reading off my slides, but I'm going to be doing that on various occasions here, partly because not everybody can see the text all that clearly, and partly because I've got time to fill here, people. Above all, the protagonist is the reader. The book is pulled forward by the reader's desires, hopes for attaining them, obstacles to attaining them, and triumphs over those obstacles. You serve as the reader's proxy, the reader's inspiration, and the reader's teacher. And the first thing in that is structure. Good structure is not like a building. Stone on stone, held in place by its own weight, with rooms for the reader to go in and sit down in. No, good structure is like a suspension bridge, held in place by tension and made for getting the reader from one place to another across a gap they couldn't otherwise cross. Now, to be fair, it should also be more focused than this photo, but I have to tell you, I'm only using my own photos, and it turns out I don't take a lot of pictures of suspension bridges. We always feel things about things. We don't always notice it. We don't always admit it, but we do. Humans are rational beings. Of course we are. We rationalize everything we want. People who insist they're strictly logical are the most susceptible to being led by emotions because they convince themselves that the things that are most important to them are just objective facts. And they build whole castles of reason on the deck of a suspension bridge. Come on, advance slide. Do it. There we go. Let me put it another way. We're like somebody who's walking a large dog on a leash. The dog, being emotions. We think the dog is ours and is there to protect us and look after us. We control it by pulling on the leash, and that seems to work. But one squirrel can show us how wrong we are as the dog takes off and we discover we're nowhere near strong enough to restrain it. So, as an editor, you need to be aware of what emotions are involved, what people are going to want, and what's keeping them from getting that. In fact, you even need to help them see more clearly what it is that they want or should want. Many nonfiction books are about, first of all, making them aware of a need that they might not have been aware that they had before, sort of like me walking into a camera store. And right now what I want is, and what things they need to get through to get to what they want. And the first person, okay, well. Ooh. How are we? Well, I'll see how this all looks when I do the video afterwards. The first person you need to do this with is the author, not the reader. You'll get to the reader. First of all, you need to start with the fact that you are not just working with a text. You're working with a person. This is true in all editing, but it's even more true in structural and substantive editing than it is in copy editing. You don't often communicate exactly directly in person with the author in copy editing, but in the structural and substantive, you're often having sit-down meetings or phone calls with them from time to time, and you're always writing to them directly. You're helping the author achieve a set of desired results, and that means that you're helping the author overcome obstacles on the way to that. Obstacles such as the author not having enough of a distant view of the book or article to see how it plays for others, and also perhaps the author not having enough experience or confidence, or having too much confidence. But the number one thing, since you're helping the author to achieve their desires, is that you have to like the author. You have to like them, and you have to want them to achieve what they want to achieve. You can't, if you can't make yourself like the author or respect what they're trying to do, you're not the person for the job. You may be desperate for the money, and I understand that, but you're not going to do a good job because your feelings will be pulling in a different direction. You ever seen a person walking two dogs that don't want to go the same way? You don't have to like them without reservation. Nobody's perfect. If you like everybody without reservation, no, you don't. Never mind. But you should be able to focus on what about them you do like and want to help, at least for as long as it takes to work on the book. Which also means that you need to meet the author and talk with them about the book. Get a feel for them, how they do things, how they talk about things, what they want. You don't have to do a high contact edit with lots of meetings or phone calls. Well, for some authors you can't avoid it. Hi, Nathan. Nice talking to you. Yeah, I'm just walking through the Eaton Center with my wife. What's up? Actual phone call. But you do need to get to know them and communicate with them openly. Some editors see working on a manuscript as like a tug of war. And it is. But it's not a tug of war between the editor and the author. Oh, hell no, you're pulling together. You both want the same thing. And what's resisting is just the fact that it's hard work. In fact, a lot of the time, it's not so much a tug of war as just trying to move a big, heavy object. So let's get to the actual work part of this. I'm going to focus for a few minutes on the process first, just from start to finish, how I approach a structural and substantive edit. And then I'm going to be talking about the particular tactics and techniques, provided my tongue doesn't fall out of my head before that. When I'm starting a book project, some of the first questions I ask include, what will the format be? Hardcover or direct-to-trade paperback? Black ink or with colors? What kinds of illustrations does the author have in mind? All of these things affect what the reader's going to expect of the book and how they're going to feel about it, especially within the conventions of the particular genre. You have to market to the book to the reader before they read it, and you have to keep marketing it. Every book markets itself to the readers as they're going through it. Nice paper, nice typeface, etc. You feel very impressed with yourself for reading a thick, heavy book. You do. Your arms might get tired, but... And since it's nonfiction, you may want them to come back to parts of it again and again, and even recommend it to their friends. It has to be inviting, and it has to be persistently useful. And, of course, how long will it be? Now, I once had a professor for a developmental drama course who, if you asked him how long the assignment should be, he would say, "How long is a piece of string?" With the idea being, of course, it should be as long as it needs to be. Now, this applies in a wide variety of circumstances, but if you go into a shop that sells string, you will find that it comes in a variety of standardized lengths, each suited to a particular purpose for a particular set of users. This is also true for books. Just how the book looks on the shelf and how it feels when you hold it in your hand matters. Marketing also needs to know, the marketing department, actual of the book company, needs to know the target page length for the purposes of pricing, promoting, and they need to know that a lot sooner than you might think. Well, you being editors probably do think, right? But I have often had to set a word count for a book before it's actually been, written. Although we're not talking about dev editing today, that's also relevant. The length of a book plainly affects its structure and how you approach it. It's true that a book doesn't need to be any longer than it takes to get the job done, but if you change the length of the book, you change the jobs it can do. Sometimes you're just adding crap. Does all that seem pedestrian? Well, the fulfillment of desires involves a lot of mechanics, and often a lot of people who desire different things, all of it working in the same process. So, now I have the book. The book has been sent to me, 46,000 words or whatever. The first thing I do with a book when I'm doing a structural edit on it is read through it, of course. I might make a few notes as I go using Word's comment feature, but I can't really see what needs to be done to the book until I've seen what the book is. I can't tell what adjustments the structure needs until I've seen what the structure is. So I read it, and as I read it, I'm typically thinking things like this. I'm not sure what to do here. I have no idea what I'm going to do with this book. Am I even any good at this? I'm a complete fraud, aren't I? Help. Now, once I've done reading it through, and it usually takes me a few days because I try not to do more than 2 or 3 hours on a given project on a given day just to keep me fresh and keep things varied. Your results may vary. Some people like to just focus and dig in. But I will set it aside for a day or two or the weekend, and then I come back to it. And the second time I read through it, I'm thinking things like this. Oh, I get it. Yeah, I can see where this is going, what needs to happen to help it get there. Why didn't I notice that before? Okay, I definitely have some ideas here. I swear, every time. It's like that moment in The Karate Kid, or really any of several superhero movies, where the protagonist suddenly realizes he or she knows how to do amazing things. Amazing. Where did I learn that? I learned it in university, writing countless essays, later grading countless essays, and writing theses, and reading a lot of books and articles. And that's where you learned it too. An ability to understand structure takes time to develop, but the odds are good that even if you're just starting out in structural editing, you're further along than you might think. And the number one obstacle in it is probably going to be like, oh, what should I do? No, I need to do this thing. No, the anxiety. That whole anxiety is normal. Ignore it. Just go back and read it again. The second time I read it through, I put detailed thoughts on the manuscript using comments. Everybody I work with uses Microsoft Word. Now, Microsoft Word may be the devil itself, but nonetheless, the devil gets around. When I have a devil of a time is when I'm working with an author who insists on taking the Word document and running it into their own word processing program and bringing it back. That's fun. I don't usually do hands-on track changes edits at the first pass. will usually have 2 passes, so I save the hands-on for the second pass. And I just put comments and overall thoughts, questions, and suggestions the first time around, and I leave it to the author to do the revisions. I mean, it's their book. Feed the author's dog. It's important for the author to maintain a sense of ownership and discretion. Don't forget about desire. The author desires to have written a book. Their book. If the baby comes out and it looks an awful lot like the midwife, what do you think? If you take the reins too much, they can feel like they've lost control. And if they do, they're likely to suddenly want to make a whole lot of changes very late in the game because it's not feeling right to them. So, feed the author's dog. After my first structural pass, I should be delivering to the author a detailed letter with recommendations for revision, and probably also a manuscript with a lot of comments on it, and also, if there needs to be significant rearrangement, a proposed revised structural outline. And sometimes when I'm working with business authors who are very busy business dudes and are very clear that they aren't professional authors and are happy to have help, I will do the rearrangement for them and offer them a version with all the rearrangement done. That is a little sort of sketchy, but it often works. No 2 authors are alike is the point. There have been times where I've sat down with an author and said, okay, well, do you mind, I would like to do some close-up work on the text. Or sometimes they'll say to me, could you please do some close-up work on the text on the first pass? And at other times, the book is really, really in very good condition. And I don't really need to do a whole lot just to make it look like I'm doing work. A true thing is that, well, people want it to look like you're doing work. They want the corrections. Nobody actually really likes being corrected, on the other hand. So authors will thank you more if you make slightly fewer corrections than if you make a lot of corrections. It's just, you'd still make the ones that need to be made, right? But primum non nocere, first do no harm. And that doesn't just mean first do no harm to the book. It also means first do no harm to the author's ego, which could do harm to your relationship with the author. Anyway, and with all of that, I'm giving the author joy in the forward progress of the book and fear of all the work that needs to be done. I don't want them to be afraid, but just you try it. So, hang on. Yes, click forward, there we go. This thing's very unresponsive. It had a late night. When I do the second pass after the author's revisions, I usually accept all the changes and work on it as a clean document coming to me on its own terms. That is to say, I don't look and say, well, I told you to do this, and you didn't do it, so I'm going to go back and do it. No. If the author didn't do the things I suggested, there's a reason for that. And anyway, I'm not here to impose my vision on the book. I'm here to figure out what the author's vision is and what the author's trying to do and help the author do it as well as possible. So if I suggested they go one way and they went another way instead, there's a reason for that. Now, sometimes I may look at it and have the same response again. So in that case, again, I would be like, are you sure? Let's try this again. Above all, though, I'm looking for the flow, the game, the tension. So I will do hands-on changes, and if I think the reason for a change won't be clear, I'll add a comment explaining it. Sometimes I'll put a comment or query and leave it to the author to make the change. I may make little copy editing level fixes, but if there are things that I think might distract the author from the substance, I will leave them to the copy editor. See, authors don't generally have infinite flexibility and infinite acceptance of changes and completely impervious ego. If you load on a lot of things that seem picky, they might start to push back on things of substantial importance. I once mentioned this online to some guy, you know, how I don't do like little close-up fixes when I'm doing the substantive edit, and this guy's like, well, when I see garbage, I pick it up. And I'm like, boy, nice way to talk about person you're working with and the book you're working on. But aside from that, do you pick up every bit of garbage as you walk down the street? I'm telling you, in Toronto, I wouldn't done a 20-minute walk in 2 hours if I did that. So, you don't want the author to feel like you're sloppy and inattentive, so don't leave huge messes, but tell them, we're leaving all the tidy up stuff for the end, because I'm not going to bother fixing little things if we're probably going to revise the heck out of it anyway. Feed the author's dog, but you know. And also, by the way, don't take bread out of the copy editor's mouth, especially if the copy editor is getting paid by the hour. What are you doing? Let them fix it. Let them earn their money. On the other hand, if you know they're getting paid by the page, then, you know, be kind. After the author has gone over all my edits and made a few more changes in response, ideally we're at the resolving stage. Any remaining open issues of substance need to be resolved and talked through. Sometimes this resolving stage is a little more involved than other times. But the end of this is me making a clean version to go to the copy editor, and I'll do up a transmittal sheet, especially if the publisher has one, you know, to say, well, here's the things that marketing needs to know, here's the thing the copy editor needs to know, here's what design's going to need to know. And I will do up one more short email for the author and the project manager, and I will talk only wonderful things and happy valedictory statements. And then, and this is my favorite part. Wait, where's it coming? There. I send the invoice. By the way, I don't really understand people who don't like invoicing and billing. My wife coaches figure skating on the side. That's not her day job, and she always hates having to do up billing and invoice. She always feels bad about charging. I don't feel bad about charging money. People value things they pay for, and I value getting paid. Win-win, right? Starbucks discovered years ago that people would pay a bit more for their burnt coffee if they charged more for it. I mean, they weren't wrong. You know, they think it's better. You can go over to the Eaton Center and you can find stores that charge different prices for more or less the same thing. And you will see that people value the more expensive ones more highly a lot of the time. You still have to deliver value, of course. But the truth is that the fact that you enjoy it is, yeah? Does anybody ever go into a fancy restaurant and say, well, if I'm going to pay this much, I hope that the chef sure hated making it? So, anyway, charge what you're worth. Don't charge less than you're worth. Charge slightly more than you're worth if you can get away with it, but only if you can be better. So now, here we go. How do I deliver this value? How do I handle all these emotions? The readers, the authors, and mine. The readers, the authors, and mine lot. Oh, sorry. What do I look for? Let me talk about the how first. Some people will have learned the feedback sandwich approach, where you say something positive and then you give the bad news and then you say something positive again. I call this the shit sandwich approach. Nobody likes eating a shit sandwich. I don't take this approach, partly because it can lead to giving insincere praise. Sorry, I take these lips back to the shop tomorrow. What can I do? I am constitutionally incapable of giving insincere praise, but mainly because a shit sandwich is a way of delivering bad news, and there is no bad news. It's all good news. The good news is they've written a book. It's going to be a really good book, and this is how they're going to make sure it is. You're there to help them make this book a good book. Look. Nobody complains about getting a treasure map. Oh man, there's treasure, but I have to do all this travel? Yuck, that's such terrible news. I wanted to be in my backyard. No, nobody says that. I got a map to treasure. All I have to do is wade through the crocodiles and piranhas and slay the hippos, and I got the treasure. Sounds great, let's go. Usually it's not that hard with the editing, obviously. Your editorial advice means there's a good book and the author just needs to do some extra work to get there. Writing books is work, it's known. Most people know it. Here's something I wrote to one author. This book has a lot of potential. It has good stories, it has good insights, it has good advice. Once you've done your edits, and I've done mine in the next round, it will be sharp, clear, compelling, enlightening, and highly usable. To get there, all it needs is more and less. More focus with emphasis on the theme, the progression, and the specific things the reader can do, and less text overall. Specifically, less text that doesn't move the reader forward on the journey. So, now, what are the big things to look for in the structure of the book to make this journey across the bridge of love, tension, and desire. I used to get theme music, budget cuts. Rhythm. Books have rhythm. Of course books have rhythm. If you're reading a book, you get a sense of the flow of the information and you develop expectations. This is also true, of course, for shorter pieces. Often I'll do a spreadsheet listing the chapters and sometimes even the sections to see how many words there are in each so I can have an overview of the rhythm of the book rather than just going by my general impression. Think of structure symphonically. Bum 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 bum. Bum 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 bum. I'm off key. It's not just whether it's 4/4 time, it's the ebb and flow, the statement, development, restatement, and all of that is also large picture rhythm. And if you know about musical structure, it really actually informs editing structure and nonfiction, and probably fiction too, structure a lot. I don't do a lot of fiction, so I'm not going to make commitments on it. Hills and valleys, a journey. I realized I moved on before I read that. Here's something that I told an author. If you think of each subsection as like a day on an expedition or even a stretch between stops on a road trip, you'll have a sense of the kind of similarity and variation in length that will feel most natural to the reader. Now, rhythm is not just the chapters. How is the flow of the text in a chapter going to be divided up? Sometimes it's very narrative and it just flows without headings, but this does deprive the reader of landmarks. How long are you willing to go on a hike without seeing a signpost? But subheadings aren't just landmarks. As I told one author, good subheads are like grabbing someone by the lapel and telling them an important thing before they can break free. By the way, it works better in text than in real life. I said to another one, I've added subheads in various places throughout, partly for consistency of use, and partly because they can help the flow. They're like planetoids with a gravitational slingshot effect. Obviously, you use what communicates. They help control the rhythm. They help create and manage expectation and tension and fulfillment. And you don't want them to come at exactly even intervals. Somebody's going to fall asleep. But you need to watch out that you don't get subsections of a page, a half a page, 6 pages, 2 pages. You can vary them dramatically for effect, but you have to do it with intention and a sense of the rhythm. You can get away with a lot as long as you're doing it intentionally, which means you've thought about why and how you're doing it. Sometimes imagery and information that will stay with the reader is not truly part of the main flow of the text, and it risks bogging down the development of the idea and the tension if you have it in the sequence of the text, but it's still useful. In those cases, you can use sidebars and similar things if it's appropriate to the genre of the book and if the designer's not going to come screaming after you. And the reader can then choose to read it and then, when it suits them, and then get back to the main text. But it does still slow down the reader. They have to drop the thread, then they go and they pick up the thread with the understanding of where the tension was when they left it, but, they've dropped the tension a little bit. And on the other hand, you can have pull quotes and callouts that are actually part of the flow of the text and are either repeated big or are just featured big in place. And these are more signpost effects and, frankly, marketing. They help the book sell itself. They jump out. You flip through, boom. It makes it easier also. It makes the book more persistently useful because you can go back and find things. Again, though, they can be a design challenge and a distraction if they're used too wantonly. So this is something I wrote on a book project I worked on not that long ago. The current draft of the book is 40,756 words, and nearly 10,000 of those words, almost a quarter, are in one or another kind of set-off content. There are almost 100 such pieces in the book, which is nearly one per page in a print layout. Reading the book would be rather like driving down a highway with billboards all along the sides the whole way. So, here are a couple of recommendations I made for optimizing the effects of these pieces. Aim to have not more than one set-off piece every 2 or 3 pages in the manuscript. If they're too close together, they become challenging for the layout, and they also present too many distractions from the main flow of the text. Some of the pieces currently set apart in boxes, I told one author, are really useful for making the main point of the text, and you should include them in the main body text, sitting at the table, not looking through the window. Some of the other pieces are mainly promotional, good to use in a sales brochure or on a website to sell services, but not right for a book that is an adventure and self-development for the reader. A book has to keep selling itself to the reader, but it should do this just by maintaining a sense of delivering value with more to come, rather than having ad breaks all the time. In a book, you have to consider the first impressions. Not just in the book, but in every chapter. You've got to set the tone. In a book, everything is expected to be there for a reason, so the strong opening has to have a thematic connection and set the tone. If it's a book about Tuscan cooking and it opens with a recounting of a fist fight in a restaurant in Florence, that had better be somehow emblematic of the rest of the content. You know, if you're starting a movie with a car chase and then it's a romantic movie, why did you do that? And above all, watch the imagery. As I told one author here, you start this chapter with a certain amount of what editors often call throat clearing, along with some general statements of principles. But don't forget, in writing, unlike in banking, you need more than principle to get interest. Anchor your opening with a good image, a good story, or both. You have some nails to pound in, and waving your hand at them won't do the job. Get something solid, if not a hammer, then a shoe. So I said, imagery. Imagery is the leash on the dog. It's the cables on the suspension bridge. It really helps to have stories or metaphors or diagrams or examples or some combination so that the reader has something concrete to hang the abstract concepts on. Generally, it's good to bring those in early, even right up front, so that when you explain the ideas later, the reader can relate to them right away. Some things I've told authors: it's important to give the reader a visual and emotional attachment to the subject. That creates concrete details for them to use in understanding the information and a tension that pulls them forward. A good, clear picture of a situation with some emotional value and tension will always give the best structure of tension to attach the more abstract and theoretical and general points to. Also, make sure to stay on point. Stick with 1 or 2 main images so as not to scatter the focus. And watch out for bringing in things you're enthusiastic about that might not be the strongest illustrations. Always a hazard. And be specific. Give relevant details that people will feel something about. It can be subtle. Some writers like to talk about what a person is wearing or what they like to eat. It does need to be relevant, though. And it should not key into any inappropriate prejudices. If you talk abstract generalities first and then give a concrete example, it can lead to useful aha moments. You know, well, here's the principle. When this shows up in real life. Oh, that's it. That's how it shows up in real life. That's great. But the thing is that the reader has been holding onto this abstract stuff floating in midair for quite a while. And, you know, if you're going to nail clouds to the wall, you shouldn't wait until they've dissipated. Say you start a chapter with consistent association of 2 independent stimuli can lead to one stimulus provoking a response appropriate to the other stimulus. Yeah, okay, I mean, all right. But let's say you start a chapter with Pavlov found that if he rang a bell before feeding time for his dogs, the simple ringing of a bell would cause them to salivate at other times. Okay, better, but let's see. How about, in grad school, I used to eat a huge supper and then go to the library afterwards. Now, every time I go to the library, I need to use the washroom. Well, okay, or depending on your book. My grandmother always wore Chanel No. 9 when we visited her for her amazing holiday feasts. Now, whenever I smell Chanel No. 9, I get hungry. That one's not true. My grandmother didn't wear perfumes. But what do you think the reader will most likely feel things about? And obviously, this is very much the author's job, but it's your job to help the author understand it's their job and to provoke them. There's no harm in suggesting images, by the way, and suggesting things. They can reject them, but if they reject them, it often spurs them to think of things that they would prefer. Now, of course, everyone's in the solution business. We're all bartenders. Bartenders are in the solution business, literally. But first, We're in the problem business. Readers have, or will soon learn that they have, problems, and they're going to feel strongly about them. As I told an author, start with the problem, not the solution, and go step by step. A problem is something people feel. Show them the problem, tell them why it's their problem, and make them feel it, and then lead through the obstacles and challenges to the solution, step by step, feeling by feeling. You're not just talking about solving the problem. In this book, you're actually solving it step by step, and they're feeling through it as they go. I remember my first year theater professor, Philip McCoy, telling us that people read theater reviews for 3 reasons. Will it be any good? Was it any good? And isn't that interesting? Well, McCoy was a smart guy, but no one buys books just for, isn't that interesting? Even if they think they do. The bare minimum is the problem, how do I feel less bored? But that's not the target you aim for, because Twitter takes care of that. Or, choose your social media site. Every book is like a new tool, a new camera, a new kitchen knife, forgot to bring one. A new notebook. Everybody has a new notebook. We just got them in our swag bags. They're not very fancy, but whatever your favorite toy is, you buy it telling yourself it's going to solve a problem for you. Sometimes the problem is really just that you desire to feel a greater sense of mastery over the world. Or you just desire to buy a luxury because buying luxuries makes you feel happy. But as you hold that lovely little flexible knife, that if you ever need to skin a dozen tomatoes in under a minute, you can do it. Fantasy problems, by the way, are also problems in the world of selling books. Sometimes completely made up, invented, fantasized problems sell more than real problems. Because everyone's number one problem is how to feel even better about themselves. So, it may or may not be a narrative, but it needs to keep moving forward, but not always in a simple straight line. If it's not a manual or a quick reference, you can toy with the readers, especially if it's a whole book. They're here for facts, but they're also here for enjoyment, whether they admit it or not. The fact is, if you have a manual for your blender or whatever, and you look at it and it's boring and straightforward, that's fine, it's clear. But if it's enjoyable, you're probably going to keep going back to it and tell your friends about it. Why not? Why not enjoy reading blender manuals, I say? And the satisfaction at the end of it will be enhanced if there's an awareness of the obstacles to its achievement. Less so in blender manuals, I suppose. But maintain the tension, no scenic detours. As I told one author, you're a very good and very fluid writer, so there's nothing that stands out as an easy cut, but you sometimes take a more scenic route when a more direct one would be most effective. Have a look at the kinds of suggestions I've given in a few places, and as you do the revisions for this round, also keep an eye out for other places where you can tighten by, for instance, taking out 1 or 2 of several examples, rather than me deciding which examples to cut, because sometimes it turns out that some of those examples have a stronger leash to the dog than others. And you don't always know. And you don't want them to be like, well, I'll cut that as my favorite, but I mean, yes, murder your darlings. Everybody tells authors, murder your darlings. Sure, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that we're in the jobs of murdering other people's darlings. They tend to feel bad about that. Or if we have to murder, we at least tell them, no, it's all for the best. Here's another. At times you have extended sections talking about bigger issues. Except as they relate directly to something that the reader can use, those are really for a whole different book. Keep it crisp, vivid, economical, and directed at the reader. At times also it reads as though you were thinking through the issue as you wrote it down, and you cover the same point from a number of closely related angles. That's normal enough for a first draft, but for a revised and tightened draft, a lot of that can be trimmed. You also add details like hedges and disclaimers that serve mainly to cushion the hard bits. It's like bubble wrap, and you can leave it aside. Verbal bubble wrap. Always cut the verbal bubble wrap. And, some people will be like, no, just don't write this when you're circling the pen and doing the throat clearing, don't write that stuff. I say, no, go ahead, absolutely, write it. You need to write it so you can write the rest. Then you can go back and cut it. Write it, cut it. It's all in good fun. Cultivate non-attachment. I use the bridge metaphor with authors a lot. As I've said, a book structure should be like a suspension bridge held in place by tension and offering a road to the fulfillment of the reader's desires. I think you already know this. The main thing is to make sure that all the cables holding up this bridge are at full tension, which also means doing away with a few that aren't helping to carry the load. And the way to do this for your book, I told this author, I think, is by setting the cables out plainly, setting down the structure by sections, chapters, and subheads, and then putting in what's going to pull the reader through, and not putting in anything that, as interesting as it may be in its own right, isn't pulling any weight. Save that stuff for telling your friends over beers later. And often, your points of adjustment for the tension are mainly at the connections. As I told an author, the good news is that the tension in this book is actually pretty easy to adjust. It's like tuning a guitar. You just need to know which screws to turn. And as you probably know, the tension adjustments are at the ends of the strings in guitars. In the course of the book, it mainly involves foreshadowing and forecasting the progression, landmarking it at each point, look over your shoulder, then look ahead, and showing how you've gotten to where you are and what you get there. I think I meant to say what got you there. I don't know. I copied and pasted this from a letter. What, I'm supposed to be coherent? This is more of a tip and tail thing in each chapter than something that affects the text all the way through. Just make sure you keep leading the reader at each juncture. Or, to use a different metaphor, the main thing it needs for the reader is always to have a sense of connection and progression, so it's clear why they're being told these things in this order. There are usually a lot of different possible orders for a book. You just need to give them the sense that the order you chose is the inevitable one. The good news is that this mainly involves just adding some signposts at the trail junctions. The development within the chapters is generally clear. It's more a matter of making sure that when you reach the end of one chapter, there's a sense that you've gotten where you were going in this stage, you're where you're supposed to be, and now you're going to another stage that leads naturally onward from where you're at. So, okay, your readers have a problem, they want to get to the resolution. Never forget they will always be asking, what do I do? Give them clear action items, things they can do. Not, in some ways, cookbooks are models for nonfiction books. You can pick up cookbooks that have lengthy stories of exposition, but at the end you want to know how to make the recipe. Have you ever bought those old cookbooks that are so frustrating? You know, they just say, make a good roux, and to it add 3 quarts of your grandmother's brown sauce. And I'm like, thank you. Okay. It doesn't have to be bullet point actions. Those are genre specific. It doesn't even have to be in imperatives, although I'm very fond of imperatives. Depending on the genre, you can just say, these are things that other people have done. There's nothing quite so satisfying and motivating as a well-structured set of marching orders. It's important to give readers clear action items. We are probably familiar with this: SMART, specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, time-bound. There are variations on what SMART stands for. But the point is, I want to know, concrete, sink my teeth. Just tell me, how much do I preheat the oven for? If somebody says, no, it's just heat, I'm going to smite you. And, at the same time, it's also helpful if they tell you a recipe is going to take half an hour, that they mean that includes the time it takes to cut up the vegetables. Somebody mentioned this during the lunch break. Some authors, by the way, aren't very good at ending their books. They just stop. I've often used the metaphor of a fireworks show. When you're watching fireworks, how do you know when the show is ending? Because it doesn't just go boom, 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 boom. It goes boom, 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 etc. And then stops, and all the smoke is finally blowing away. The end of a book has to feel like an end. It doesn't have to be big explosions, but it has to show that loose ends are tied up, or if they're not tied up, make a point that they're not tied for a good reason. A clear and coherent thing has to be communicated, and it also has to show there's a way forward, because after all, to return to the bridge metaphor, when you get across a bridge, you usually keep going. Why did you cross the bridge? I mean, the exception is actually the Capilano suspension bridge from my original photo, where most people, once they get across it, turn around and go right back. But sometimes the journey is the, never mind. So yes, make sure you've cooked and served everything that's on the menu. Oh, and there's one more kind of thing to watch out for that has to do with desires. The desires of other people in the world besides you, your author. And your desire, by the way, as an editor, to do a good job that will help the author avoid undue trouble and expense, such as not getting unpleasant letters from lawyers. So, this also matters. Have all rights been secured? Have permissions been gotten? Have all people been quoted and checked with? All identities protected as necessary? Is everything that needs to be cited suitably cited? Is no one being defamed? Are images used only with permission? Have suitable copies been obtained? And have song lyrics being used only when absolutely necessary, with permission? And are you really sure? I think many of us know that the music industry is actually an industry that sells music to pay for lawyers. It is basically an industry of lawyers who have found a particular means of income. Financially, I mean, we all love music, we like music, but financially, music industry pays for lawyers. And oh boy, they're very protective of their right. So, only quote from songs if you really need to. And even then, you probably don't. I remember talking with a friend who had met someone who had said she was a writer, and the friend asked what kind and genre of the writer. And this new acquaintance said, "I write from the heart." So when my friend told me this, we both said, "Oh no." But while I wouldn't recommend writing from the heart as the dominant mood of your writing if you want to make a career of it, the truth is that every writer writes from the heart, even if they don't mean it. Of course they do. They have something they love, something they want. This book is their baby, their love child. The editor is the midwife, not the mom. I don't edit from the heart, though. I edit for the heart, the reader's heart, the author's heart, and the hearts of everyone else involved in the process. Some people say hearts and minds. That's fine. We got the minds. It's nonfiction. Don't worry about it. Get your facts straight. And I edit to find the heart of the book and make it as strong as possible. So now, let's talk. Questions, comments, or if you're all desperate to go for a drink, doesn't matter.